By the time Friday afternoon rolled around, I could already sense my weekend slipping through my fingers. Not because I had exciting plans, I didn't, but because I knew exactly how this pattern usually played out. Somewhere around 6, maybe 6:30, my phone would light up. Not with a real question, just a statement. On my way. Sometimes there wasn't even a message. Just headlights cutting into the driveway and my doorbell ringing like it was part of a standing appointment. The first couple of weekends, I convinced myself it was temporary. My sister was overwhelmed. She needed support. That's what family does, right? But by the fourth weekend, I started to notice something unsettling. The help only flowed in one direction. There was no checking in. No asking if I was okay with it. Just the unspoken expectation that my time was automatically available because hers carried more weight. When she showed up for the 5th weekend in a row, I didn't open the door right away. I stood in the hallway, listening to the muffled sound of the kids' voices through the wood, excited, loud, full of restless energy. I love my nieces. And that was part of the problem. Loving them made it easier for her to keep doing this, to assume I'd always step in. When I finally opened the door, she was already halfway back to her car, keys dangling from her hand. "I can't do this weekend," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need you to take them with you." She froze, like I'd suddenly started speaking another language. "What do you mean you can't?" she asked. "I mean I'm not your built-in babysitter," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't list every time she'd taken advantage of me. I just said the sentence I'd been avoiding for weeks. Her expression shifted fast, surprise, then offense, then something sharper. "So now my kids are a burden," she snapped, loud enough that the kids could hear. "That's not what I said." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Unbelievable. After everything I do, this is how you treat me. For what?" I asked before I could stop myself. That's when things tipped. Her voice rose. She talked over me. Old stories surfaced, twisted into evidence that I'd always been selfish. I watched it unfold like a familiar storm, amazed at how quickly discomfort turned into accusation. She pulled out her phone. "Fine. I'll call Mom and Dad. Let them hear this." I didn't stop her. Part of me wanted to. The part that had been trained to smooth things over, to fix everything. But another part of me was exhausted, deeply, completely tired. She left with the kids, her tires screeching too loudly against the gravel. The silence that followed felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath. My parents called 10 minutes later. Then again. I didn't answer. I already knew how that conversation would go. I'd be told I was making things difficult. That family helps family. That my sister was under so much stress. My stress never seemed to count. I made a dinner I didn't really want and sat at the table, waiting for the guilt to fully settle in. Instead, about an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Not the doorbell, a knock. Firm. Deliberate. When I opened it, 2 police officers stood on my porch. Calm. Neutral. One asked for my name. The other glanced past me into the house, like he was checking for something out of place. "We received a report," the first officer said, "about a possible child abandonment situation." The words landed slowly. Child abandonment. My stomach dropped, but my mind felt strangely clear. "I didn't abandon any children," I said. "They aren't here." They asked me to explain, and I did. I told them about the repeated weekends. About saying no. About my sister leaving with the kids. I didn't editorialize. I didn't defend myself. I just explained what happened, step by step. They listened. Took notes. Asked for names, times, details. One of them nodded. "So you declined childcare, and the children stayed with their parent?" "Yes." "That's all we needed to confirm," he said. They didn't apologize. They didn't reprimand me. They simply explained that false or exaggerated reports could carry consequences, and that boundaries around childcare were a civil issue unless a child was actually in danger. The whole interaction lasted less than 10 minutes. When they left, the porch light clicked off, and the street went quiet again. I sat down on the couch and noticed my hands were shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the delayed release of something I'd been holding inside for a long time. My sister didn't call that night. My parents did, once. I let it go to voicemail. My mother's message sounded tight, confused, embarrassed. She said we'd talk later. We eventually did. The conversations were messy and unsatisfying. No one apologized the way movies lead you to expect. My sister said she'd panicked and overreacted. My parents focused on how serious it was that the police had been involved, as if it had happened to all of us equally. But something had changed. The weekends stayed quiet. Too quiet at first, then normal. No surprise drop-offs. No assumptions. When my sister needed help later, she asked. Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I didn't. The difference was that my answer finally mattered. There were smaller costs. Family dinners felt stiffer. My sister and I didn't joke the way we used to. There was a thin layer of caution where familiarity once lived. But I slept better. I didn't win anything. There was no moment where everyone admitted I'd been right. What I gained was quieter and heavier than that, the realization that when I said no, the world didn't fall apart. And neither did I. The door stayed closed when I needed it to. And that turned out to be enough.